It's been another difficult, excruciating week. Even as the community of the hometown of my heart, Minneapolis, watched the trial of police officer Derek Chauvin, who is charged with the murder of George Floyd. Another outrageous death of a Black man by a gun held by a police officer took place in Brooklyn Center, a suburb that is about the same distance from the Hennepin County Courthouse as the city of New Haven is from this temple. By now, we know the details. George Floyd died as his neck was compressed by Derek Chauvin for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. And Dante Wright died when Kim Potter reached for her gun instead of a taser and shot him. She has been charged with manslaughter, although an investigation still continues. And much closer to home, late last evening, a man with a gun entered the airport FedEx facility in Indianapolis and killed 8 people before killing himself. As I composed my thoughts this morning, details were still sketchy. It's becoming a little clearer as the day goes on. But I am sure we are all horrified by these murderous acts. Our society is acutely ill from a complex of afflictions: fear, hate, violence, and inadequately controlled access to guns that kill human beings. This affliction affects us all to one degree or another, but it affects a disproportionate number of people of color, and it affects everyone who loses friends, loved ones, and community members to violent deaths. This is a chronic condition that has entered an acute phase. A cure or even effective treatments elude us. In Torah this week, we read about afflictions and how a society dealt with them. The double portion from Leviticus, Tazira-Metzora, describes tazarat, usually translated as leprosy, but may be understood as any illness or inner challenge, physical, mental, or spiritual, which necessitates a period of separation from communal life. And we learn of the Metzora, a person afflicted with Sa'arat who had to be removed from the community and placed outside the camp. While the Metzora was moved outside the community, they were not alone. A Levitical priest, which we can understand as a helping professional, was charged with visiting the Metzora and assessing their condition. When, and I suppose also if, the affliction was healed, the priest was charged with the responsibility of providing a ritual by which the Metzora could re-enter the community. Torah describes a condition that requires that a person be excluded from community, but it also delineates a pathway for the return of that person to community. As is not at all an unusual experience when I read Torah, I have been struggling with how to understand this practice in a way that sheds light on the deeply broken world that we live in. I'll get back to you when I have it all figured out. But this is clear to me. We also learn in Exodus that to God we shall be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Even before the destruction of the second temple and the end of the priesthood, God was commanding each of us to act as priests to act as the priests would act. That means that the responsibility of tending to the afflicted falls to us. This story from Torah emphasizes the exclusion of people from community, even while it provides a way for their return. I'm finding myself inspired by the teaching of Rabbi Dina Cowens. She taught, instead of pushing people away, as the Torah suggests, later Jewish tradition teaches us to turn our attention, love, and care to people on the fringes. There is a story in the Talmud of a rabbi who meets Elijah, the prophet. The story goes like this. When will the Messiah come? The rabbi asks Elijah. Go ask him yourself, says Elijah. And where will I find him? Asks the rabbi. He sits at the gates of Rome among the poor and the lepers. How will I recognize him? Asks the rabbi. Like this, says Elijah. All the other lepers undo and retie all the bandages at once, but he does it one at a time. Rabbi Cowan teaches that this story is inspirational for two reasons. First, it clearly tells us that we should not avoid the people at our margins. If the Messiah can sit among them, all the more so, we should occupy ourselves with their concerns. But she writes that she also loves that the story leaves it unclear whether the Messiah is tying his or her own bandages or the bandages of others. Perhaps the Messiah is themselves a leper, or perhaps they are out there caring for the marginalized. What if the way forward from our societal afflictions could look like the Levitical priest tending to the fear and the hate that afflicts too many people? What if when our hope for a messianic age can inspire us to care for the marginalized? And an even bigger question, what would it be like for each of us to take up this task ourselves? As frightening and repellent as the news of each tragedy is, I believe in the core of my being that Jewish tradition calls us to run towards our fear and our disgust of violence. Not into violent situations themselves, of course. No, not at all. But we are each called to take our place in the nation of priests, of helpers. To close, I will share some words from my personal heroine, Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen, who said, "What if we're exactly what's needed? What then?" She asks us, and I ask you, how would I live if I was exactly what's needed to heal the world? May a healed world, a peaceful world, be God's will speedily and in our day and from the work of our hands. Shabbat Shalom.